Montana Territory, 1878. The wind had a bite to it that morning, and the whole town of Dry Creek had already decided what kind of woman Marigold Farris was. She stepped off the freight wagon just after dawn, her dark green skirts dust-covered, her boots worn, and her gloved hands tied around the leather satchel she refused to let out of her grip. Her brown hair was braided tight, pinned up like she meant to keep her head down. She did. But it did not matter. The whispers started before her second step. "That's the one," someone muttered near the mercantile. "Ran off with a Pinkerton agent. Left her husband in Kansas to die." "No husband," another voice said. "She was never married. Just ruined." Marigold kept her eyes forward as she made her way to the boarding house. She had not been back in the West for 3 years, not since the fire, not since the desert swallowed her life whole. She had no intention of stirring up memories in Dry Creek. She only needed a roof, a job, and to be left alone. But Dry Creek was not kind to women with mystery in their past. She paid for her room with the last of her coin and started work the next morning at the dressmaker's, stitching hems and mending buttons. Quiet work. She did not speak unless spoken to, and even then, only with a nod or a soft, "Yes, ma'am." Still, the town watched her like a hawk circling a wounded rabbit. The only soul who did not look away when she passed was the cowboy with the kind eyes. He rode into town twice a week, dusty and lean, with a dappled gray gelding and a slow, steady gait. He was not a man who filled up space, but somehow, he made it feel safe. He never stared, never whispered. Just nodded when their paths crossed and tipped his hat like she was not made of secrets. The first time he spoke to her, she was kneeling outside the dress shop, patching a tear on a child's apron. "You sew like someone who learned the long way," he said, his voice warm and low. She looked up. The sun was behind him, and his shadow cut across her lap. He had a strong jaw, sun-browned skin, and honest blue eyes. His hat was worn, the brim bent from years of use. "I had to," she said. "It was either that or wear rags." He crouched beside her. "Name's Quillan Boone. Folks just call me Quill." She hesitated. "Marigold Farris." He nodded once. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Farris." He did not ask why she was here, where she had come from, or what she was running from. That alone made her chest ache. Quill kept showing up. He brought her a handful of wild flowers once and left them on the wooden stoop without a word. Another time, a bag of dried apples. Once he asked if she had eaten that day. She had not, and he returned 10 minutes later with a tin plate of stew from the saloon kitchen, still hot. "People do not take kindly to me," she said on a gray afternoon, watching the clouds roll in. "I notice," he said. "Why are you not like them?" He looked at her then, really looked. "Because I have known what it feels like to carry something no one else understands." She did not ask what that was. He did not ask either. One evening, 2 weeks after they met, she found a note in her apron pocket. Just a simple line. "If you ever need to get out of town, I will take you. No questions." The words burned in her chest. But she stayed. 3 weeks passed, and the town's eyes grew sharper. One morning, the dressmaker told her not to come back. "No work for you here anymore," the woman said, not even looking up from her ledger. Marigold stood still. "I have done good work." "You have done enough. Word is, you were a saloon girl down near Abilene. Men paid for your company. Now I do not want your kind around my customers." Marigold turned, face pale but steady, and walked out. Quill found her sitting on the back porch of the boarding house, arms wrapped around her knees. "They turned you out," he said. She nodded. He sat beside her. "You want to talk about it? I lost everything once," she said. "I was 19. My brother died in a mining collapse. I tried to get work. Got caught up with a man who said he could help. He took everything, money, my name, my dignity. Left me in the middle of Kansas like I was nothing." Quill said nothing, just sat there, his boot tapping the dirt, his hands steady on his knees. "I came west to start over," she finished. "But it follows me." He turned his head toward her. "It does not matter to me." Tears filled her eyes. "Why not?" "Because I see you now." "Not what they say." She looked at him, and something in her cracked open. She leaned into him, her shoulder brushing his. He let her rest there. The next morning, the town turned uglier. A man named Fletcher, drunk on corn whiskey, cornered her behind the post office. "Pretty thing like you should not be walking alone," he sneered. "Heard you used to earn your keep laying down." Marigold shoved him, hard. "Get away from me." He grabbed her wrist. Before she could scream, Quill was there. He slammed Fletcher into the wall with a force that shook the boards. "Touch her again," he growled, "and I will break every bone in your hand." Fletcher cursed, stumbling off, but he did not come back. That night Marigold packed her satchel. She could not stay. Not anymore. She found Quill at the livery. "I cannot live like this," she said, her voice shaking. "They will not stop." He looked at her, calm and certain. "Then come with me." "To where?" "I have a small place near the river, 5 miles out. No one there but me and the horses. You can stay as long as you want." Her fingers tightened on the satchel strap. "You are not afraid of what they will say?" He stepped closer. "I do not care what they say. I care how you feel. And I want you to feel safe." Her heart beat faster. "I do not deserve you," she whispered. He touched her face, gentle. "You deserve more than anyone has ever given you." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Then I will come." Quill helped her onto the horse, and they rode out under a sky full of stars, leaving Dry Creek behind. And for the first time in years, Marigold felt something that almost scared her more than fear-hope. The cabin stood tucked into a bend of the river, its roof low and weathered, with smoke curling from the stone chimney. Cottonwoods lined the bank, their branches bare from the season's turn. The water ran cold and clear, the sound of it steady beneath the hush of wind through the grass. Marigold stepped down from the saddle with a stiffness she didn't try to hide. Her legs ached, and the cold air had worked its way through her coat. Quill didn't offer to help. He only watched her for a quiet moment, then walked ahead, unlatching the wooden gate that creaked open on a rusted hinge. "There's a stove inside," he said. "I've kept a fire going most nights." She followed him through the doorway. The warmth met her like a held breath. The room was simple rough-hewn walls, a table with 2 chairs, and a cot in one corner with a folded quilt. A row of hooks held a coat, a horse brush, and a battered hat. The scent of pine sap and wood smoke clung to everything. "You live here alone?" she said. He hung his rifle by the door. "Most winters, yes." She set her satchel on the floor and took in the space, her eyes lingering on the shelves built into the far wall, lined with jars of dried beans, flour, and strips of jerky. A small bundle of dried sage hung beside a flint striker and a copper kettle. "I'll sleep on the cot," Quill said. "You can take the loft. There's a ladder and a mattress up there. Not much, but it's clean." She looked up. A narrow platform above the main room held a rolled blanket and a lantern. "I'm not used to kindness that expects nothing in return," she said. Quill leaned his hip against the table. "Then we'll take it slow. You don't owe me anything, Marigold." She nodded once, and climbed the ladder. That night, she lay awake listening to the river and the creak of wind against the shutters. Beneath her, she heard Quill's breathing, steady and calm. The quiet didn't feel hollow. It felt like space she could grow into. By morning, the snow had come. It wasn't heavy, just a thin layer of white that softened the dirt path and clung to the fence rails. Quill was already outside, splitting wood with slow, practiced swings. Marigold watched from the doorway, her arms wrapped in a wool shawl he'd left folded on the table. "You always work like that?" she asked when he paused to wipe his brow. "Like what?" "Like the world might fall apart if you stop." He set down the axe and looked over. Maybe it would. She crossed the yard, boots crunching over the frost. I can help. He handed her a bundle of kindling. You know how to stack it? She crouched beside the pile. I learned. In Idaho, one winter. A man traded me food for keeping his fire going. He was old. Thought he was doing me a favor. Was he? No. But I didn't freeze. They worked in silence for a time, the rhythm easy between them. When the last log was stacked, Quill stood, brushing snow from his gloves. You ever think about staying somewhere? He asked. She looked out at the river. I never thought I'd be asked. I'm not asking yet. Just wondering. She didn't answer, but her gaze followed the water as it moved past the trees, slow and constant. The days began to take shape. Marigold swept the floor, boiled beans, and mended a tear in Quill's shirt with a needle she kept wrapped in cloth. He showed her where he trapped rabbits, how to set a snare without leaving scent. Sometimes they walked the riverbank together, not speaking, just listening to the world's quiet. One evening, she found him oiling a saddle behind the cabin. Do you miss people? She asked, settling on the porch step. He didn't look up. Some. Not most. She pulled her knees to her chest. I used to think I needed a crowd to feel real. Now I think I just needed one person to see me. Quill set the saddle down and sat beside her. You don't talk much about who you were, he said. I don't think she exists, not anymore. He nodded slowly. Then maybe you'd get to decide who you are now. She turned to him. And if I don't know yet? Then we figure it out. One day at a time. They sat there as the light faded, the sky streaked with pale gold. Inside, the fire crackled. A storm was coming. She could feel it in the air. Later, while she stirred a pot of stew, Quill came in, brushing snow from his shoulders. I found tracks down by the fence, he said. Someone passed through. Didn't stop, but they were close. She set the spoon down. Do you think it was someone from town? Could be. Or a trapper heading east. Hard to say. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. If they come looking, they won't find you here, he said. But if they do, I won't let them take anything from you again. She looked up, eyes meeting his. Why are you like this with me? He stepped closer, then paused. Because I see you trying to build something out of pieces. I've done the same. She reached for his hand, and he let her take it. The touch was quiet, but it held. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and slow, covering the tracks. The storm broke in the night. Wind lashed the cabin walls, and snow came fast, blanketing the trees in silence. The next morning, the world was white and still, the river muffled beneath ice. Marigold woke to the sound of a kettle rattling on the stove and the scent of something earthy simmering juniper and dried meat. Quill stood near the fire, sleeves rolled, stirring slow. His coat was hanging by the door, soaked from an early morning trek. She climbed down from the loft barefoot, the floorboards cold under her feet. You went out in that? She asked. He didn't turn. Had to check the fence. Something chewed through the twine yesterday. Tracks for light fox, maybe. She moved closer, wrapping the shawl tighter. You could have waited. Nothing out there's worth freezing for. He lifted the ladle and poured broth into a tin cup, handing it to her. I've been cold before. Doesn't bother me like it used to. She sipped in silence, the warmth sinking deep. You ever live among folks? A town, I mean. For a spell, he said, sitting across from her. Back near Fort Benton. I worked a freight line. Packed mules, hauled timber. What happened? He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Sheriff's brother got himself caught beating a Methodist boy near the river. I pulled him off. Didn't sit right with the town that I stepped in. Sheriff told me I'd be better off elsewhere. She let the cup rest in her palms. You always walk toward the trouble? Quill shook his head. Only when someone smaller's beneath it. They didn't speak for a while, Just listen to the wind settle. Marigold stood and pulled a biscuit from the cloth-wrapped bundle he'd left near the stove. I've seen men like that, Sheriff. Ones who don't mind cruelty if it keeps things quiet. Quill studied her. Did he hurt you? No, she said. But he watched while another man did. He didn't press. Just nodded once and set another log on the fire. That evening, Quill brought in a sack of seed oats from the lean-to and laid them near the hearth to thaw. Marigold was sweeping the ashes from the stove when she paused, eyes on the window. There's something I want to ask, she said. He glanced up. Go on. If I stayed here. Past winter, maybe longer. What would that mean to you? He set the oats down slowly. I wouldn't expect anything. You've been run too hard already. That's not what I meant. She turned to face him, her hands still at her sides. I've spent most of my life being where I wasn't wanted. This place. It's not just quiet. It feels clean. Like nothing's been stained yet. He crossed the room, stopping just short of her. You saying you want to make a place here? I think I already have, she said. But I don't want to sleep in your loft forever if I don't belong. You belong wherever you choose to stay, he said, voice low. But if you're asking whether I'd want you here beside me, not above me, then yes. Every morning, every night. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped forward and placed her hand against the space where his shirt opened at the collar. Her fingers found the steady beat of his heart. The warmth of him. The truth. I'm not afraid of being with you, she said. I'm only afraid I won't know how. You don't have to know, he said. You just have to stay. That night she didn't climb the ladder. She stayed in the chair beside him, her head resting against his shoulder as the firelight ebbed. They said little, but when her hand found his, he didn't let go. By the end of the week, they had cleared a space behind the cabin. Marigold planted onions in rows, her sleeves rolled to the elbows, fingers in the cold soil. Quill repaired the chicken coop, hammering in new slats from a pile of salvaged pine. I used to think I couldn't make anything grow, she said one afternoon, brushing dirt from her skirt. You were planting in the wrong place, that's all, he replied. Spring came slow but certain. The river thawed. The trees budded. A pair of mule deer began passing near the fence each dusk, their steps unhurried. Marigold hung wet linens on a line strung between two posts, and Quill carved her a comb from aspen wood, smoothing the teeth until it glided through her hair without snag. One morning, she found him standing behind the cabin, staring off toward the ridge. What is it? She asked. Rider, he said. Coming from Dry Creek. She stepped beside him, the wind tugging at her braid. Do you think they're looking for me? Maybe, he said. But they'll have to come through me first. They waited, still and silent, until the rider crested the hill and turned east, never glancing their way. Marigold let out a breath. I don't want to go back. You won't, Quill said. Not unless you choose to. She touched his wrist, grounding herself. I choose this. He looked down at her, a softness in his eyes that hadn't been there months ago. So do I. They walked back inside together. The light through the window spilled across the floor in gold bands. In that small, quiet room, with nothing but the wind and the warmth between them, Marigold knew she had found something she was never meant to lose again. By late April, the thaw gave way to long days of light and wet earth. The river swelled with snow melt and ran faster than before, its voice louder against the stillness of the valley. Marigold began rising early, before the sun cleared the ridge, her hands calloused now, her steps sure on the uneven ground. She worked beside Quill without hesitation, planting rows of squash and corn in soil they'd turned together. One morning, as she knelt to press seeds into the till bed, she paused and set her palm flat to the earth. Quill, who had been cutting fence wire a few yards away, looked over. Something wrong? She shook her head. No. Just thinking. I never stayed anywhere long enough to watch something grow. He wiped his hands on his trousers and came to stand beside her. Then we'll watch it together. Marigold looked up at him, and something in her face softened. I think I'd like that. They spoke less in those weeks, but the silence between them held more than words. Shared glances, small gestures, the extra cup of coffee waiting near the stove, her hand brushing his as she passed the tin plate, built something steady and unspoken between them. It was not the kind of closeness that declared itself, but the kind that settled into the bones and refused to be shaken loose. One evening, after supper, she sat on the cabin step with a length of linen stretched taut in an embroidery hoop. Quill had brought it back from his last trip to the old wagon trail east of the ridge, along with a handful of dried sage and a spool of thread the color of rusted iron. You don't strike me as the needlework type, he said, nodding to her stitching. She didn't look up. There's a rhythm to it. I like the way it slows my thoughts. He leaned against the doorframe. What are you making? A cover for the table. Something to make this place feel more lived in. He crossed his arms. It already feels like home to me. That night she unrolled a small cloth bundle from the bottom of her satchel. Inside was a silver brooch, tarnished around the edges, the clasp bent. She turned it over in her palm, then held it out to Quill. My mother gave this to me before she died. I was 16. I haven't looked at it in years. Quill took it gently, studying the worn etching of a willow tree along the front. You want to keep it safe somewhere? She met his eyes. No. I want you to fix the clasp if you can. I'd like to wear it again. He nodded. I'll see to it tomorrow. The next morning, a rider came up from the south trail. Marigold saw him first, a stocky man with a battered hat and a limp in his left leg. He dismounted with a grunt and called out before he reached the gate. Boone? That you? Quill stepped out from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. Eldon? Thought you'd gone north with the cattle drive. Did, Eldon said, hitching his horse. But I came back through Dry Creek. There's talk going round. About her. Marigold stood just inside the doorway, her arms crossed over her apron. Quill's jaw tightened. What kind of talk? Eldon glanced toward her, then looked away. Sheriff's been asking about a woman matching her description. Claims she's wanted in Kansas for questioning over a missing man. Name of Harlan Tate. Marigold stepped out into the yard, her voice clear. There's nothing to question. Harlan left me to die in a town I didn't know, and I never saw him again. If he's missing, it's not my doing. Eldon scratched his neck. I believe you. But the law's got a long reach when it wants to. Quill moved closer to her. You came all this way just to warn us? Eldon nodded. You've done right by me more than once. Figured I owed you. Quill reached for his hand, shook it firm. You always ride honest, Eldon. After he'd gone, Marigold sat at the table with her hands folded tight. If they come, she said, will you run? He sat across from her, steady. I won't leave this ground. Not unless you're beside me. She looked down. I don't want to run anymore. Then we won't. That night she stood at the window long after the lamps were out, watching the sky bleed from blue to black. The moon rose low and orange, casting long shadows across the clearing. Behind her, Quill stirred in his sleep. She turned to him, climbed into bed beside him, and rested her hand over his heart. I'm not afraid, she whispered. He didn't wake, but his arm came around her without hesitation. In the morning, they would begin again. Together. The last frost passed just after the first week of May. Grass pushed up rich and green around the edge of the field where Marigold had planted early squash, and the hens began laying with more regularity. Every morning, Quill rose before the sun to check the traps along the east ridge. Marigold kept his coffee warm in the tin pot and swept out the cabin while it brewed, the scent of ash and earth lingering in the rafters. One afternoon, Quill returned from the bluff with a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. He set it on the table, unwrapped it slowly, and revealed a rusted horseshoe, bent near the curve. Found it near the old trail, he said. Buried under a layer of shale. Looks like it's been there years. She turned it over in her hands. What's it doing there, you think? Could have belonged to a wagon that never made it through. Could have fallen off and been left behind. She set it down gently. Funny how something lost can turn into something found when the ground shifts. He looked at her, quiet. I've been thinking. She waited. I got more than enough timber to build on. If we added a second room on the north side, it'd keep warmer through winter. Could put in a proper bed frame, maybe a wash basin. Her brow lifted slightly. You planning something? I want this place to hold more than just me, he said. I want it to hold us. She drew in a slow breath. You're asking. I'm saying I want your name beside mine on everything that grows here. The tools. The land. The ledger I keep for the horse buyers. I want you tied to this place in every way a person can be. She stepped around the table, laid her hand against his chest. Then you have me. They married beneath the cottonwoods at the bend of the river. No preacher, no papers, just words spoken clear and steady between them, with the wind moving through the new leaves and the river running strong beside them. Quill carved 2 bands from a strip of softened antler. He slid hers onto her finger with a touch that trembled only slightly. She pressed his ring into place with her thumb, then rested her forehead against his and whispered something just for him. He didn't answer, just pulled her close and held her until the wind quieted. That summer, they worked harder than they ever had. Quill built the new room by hand, fitting each beam with care. Marigold stitched curtains from calico she'd traded for with a passing wagon, and boiled pine sap to seal the windows. They planted beans and turnips, harvested wild mint, and dug a root cellar behind the cabin. Word never came from Dry Creek. No riders. No questions. Just silence, and in it peace. In late August, Marigold stood barefoot on the porch, her skirt hem brushing the floorboards. She held a small booklet in her hands, pages sewn together with thread, the cover made from scraps of hide. Inside, she'd begun writing down how to prepare the soil, what plants took to shade, what kept the hens laying steady. I want to remember how we did it, she said when Quill joined her. He leaned against the railing beside her. You planning on teaching someone? She turned her head toward him. Maybe. Someday. He reached for her hand, calloused and ink-stained now, and laced his fingers through it. Then we'll keep doing things worth remembering. By the time the leaves turned gold, the fields were put to rest for winter. The new room stood solid and dry, with a proper bed and a shelf carved smooth along the wall. The nights grew longer, but the cabin stayed warm, and the stillness no longer felt like waiting. It felt like belonging. As the first snow came down, soft and slow, Quill brought in the last of the firewood, while Marigold stirred a pot of stew. She hummed low under her breath, something wordless and sweet. He stood in the doorway, watching her, and didn't speak until she turned. Something on your mind? She asked. He stepped forward, took her free hand in his. I don't know what I did to deserve this life, he said, but I'll spend the rest of it making sure you never regret staying. She held his gaze. Then we're both lucky. That night they sat by the fire, her head resting on his chest, his arm wrapped around her waist. Outside, snow fell over the river valley, clean and bright. Inside, the cabin held only the crackle of flame and the slow, matched rhythm of their breathing. Years later, when travelers passed through and asked about the couple who lived by the river, they spoke of the woman with the steady hands and the man who could quiet a horse just by standing near. They spoke of a pair who built something out of nothing and never let it go. And in the cabin, tucked between shelves lined with dried herbs and seed jars, sat a small leather-bound book. Its pages were worn, its ink faded in places, but every word was clear. They had built a life. And they had done it together.